All right, and we're live. This is Victor Coronado, your host for today. This is Nuestra America, episode 19. And Nuestra America, this new and latest version of Nuestra America, is brought to you by both ANTICONQUISTA and Orinoco Tribune. Shout out to all the folks over at Orinoco Tribune. If you're not familiar with their work, I did put a description down, put their website down in the description below if you're watching on YouTube. Again, I'm Victor Coronado, and this is Nuestra America, episode 19. Our panel today will be Natalia Urban. She's an independent journalist. You can check her out at Brazil Wire. Also, she has had her work published at Jacobin as well. And then also from Orinoco Tribune, we have Saheli Chari, and I hope I pronounced the last name correctly. Before we're going to do something a little different than what we did last week. We're going to have some headlines, and then we're going to get into the program. And actually, we have some breaking news. So, Natalia, we can talk to our audience about the breaking news.
So, good night, everybody. Almost good morning here for me in the UK. There is something very important that is happening right now in Colombia. It has been announced by the electoral authorities that they are seeking to recount the votes. Last week, Colombia went to the polls again. And the Pacto Histórico, which is the coalition of the progressive, leftist, and even like center parties, had a historical winning and taking multiple seats at the Senate. And now the electoral authorities are not happy with having a Senate that is so plural, and they decided to recount the votes. Of course, the people from Pacto Histórico are very concerned because this might mean that they are seeking out to seek frauds in the election, or they are trying to undermine the results, which is something that wouldn't be surprising since the State Department of the United States went to Colombia a week before the elections to meet with all the candidates from the right. And except Gustavo Petro, which is the favorite to not just win the election, but he's also the representative of the Pacto Histórico. So we might have a good old coup in our hands right now.
Yeah, and we're actually going to talk a little bit about Peru today, and so we're seeing similar backlash, if you will, or similar aggression, similar type of aggression from the extreme right in Peru. Going into the headlines, let's talk about what took place at Gabriel Boric's inauguration. During the inauguration of Chile's Gabriel Boric as president, Bolivian President Luis Arce and Chilean President Pedro Castillo were seen discussing energy cooperation agreements where Bolivian liquefied petroleum gas would be distributed to Peruvian towns via a future gas pipeline running through southern Peru. Cuba's in the news. The capitalist press is once again beating up on the revolutionary government of Cuba with headlines of anti-government protesters being sentenced up to 30 years in prison. This is a result of protests that took place last summer, which we covered at ANTICONQUISTA. The Cuban judicial system has levied sentences after the Cuban authorities completed their investigations into the matter. And to be fair, CNN in a CNN article, they did include a Cuban Supreme Court statement, which reads as follows: they threw stones and bottles at various officials, law enforcement officers, National Revolutionary Police facilities, patrol cars. They overturned motorcycles and cars, and caused injuries to other people and serious material damage. Another quote by the Supreme Court in U.S. News accurately pointed out the Cuban government's claim that the protests were organized and financed in the United States. Here's another Supreme Court quote, Cuban Supreme Court quote: they threw stones and bottles at various officials, law enforcement, National Revolutionary Police facilities, patrol cars. They overturned. So similar quote. Moving on to Nicaragua, The Hill did a hit piece on Nicaragua. The Hill ran the following op-ed piece and headline: a hemispheric threat, Russia's interference in Nicaragua, by Caroline C. Cohen. Now, who is Caroline C. Cohen? I looked her up. She's on Twitter. She has 132 followers. In her bio, it reads the following: she's a husky lover, she's a quiet advocate, and she's a pro-democracy and human rights advocate. According to her LinkedIn, and yes, I looked her up on LinkedIn, she's connected to something called Freedom House. You can Google it. You can look them up with a quick Google search. And of course, this is one of these cute human rights organizations preaching freedom in Latin America. In Argentina, an Argentinian judge issued an arrest warrant for Diosdado Cabello, who's the #2 man of the ruling PSUV, Chavista Party of Venezuela. The judge was responding to an extradition treaty between the governments of Argentina and the United States. The U.S. is accusing Diosdado Cabello of drug trafficking and involvement in terrorist activities, which the United States has yet to provide any evidence of to the public. In real drug trafficking news, Guaidó links to drug trafficking in Venezuela. So in Venezuela, the Venezuelan National Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez presented evidence that Juan Guaidó and his Voluntad Popular Party have links to Colombian drug trafficking. Italian Venezuelan drug trafficker Biagio Benito Garofalo Forte was arrested on March 14th in Colombia. Interpol has a red alert on him in more than 190 countries. And according to Orinoco Tribune, Guaidó appointed Garofalo Forte as a municipal lead sometime in 2016. Rodriguez also stated that Garofalo acted as a liaison between U.S. Ambassador to Venezuela, James Story. James Story, if you recall, was in Caracas just recently with those meetings between U.S. diplomats and the Chavista government of Nicolas Maduro. Rodriguez stated that photos and videos of Garofalo casually partying and hanging out with members of Guaidó's Voluntad Popular Party were shown to demonstrate the links between the two. Staying with Venezuela, Maduro's social media initiative. So Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro recently announced a new social media platform creation by the Chavista government. His hopes are that users from around the world will be able to use this new social media platform while encouraging everyone to continue to use TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook in the battle of ideas. And lastly, in Honduras, a Honduran judge has ruled that former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez should be extradited to the United States to face drug trafficking and weapons charges. The Honduran Supreme Court tweeted it will comply with the U.S. request to extradite the former president, recently replaced by populist Xiomara Zelaya, who became the country's first woman president, and she is the wife of former Honduran President Manuel Zelaya. Hernandez denies all the charges and will look to appeal the extradition decision. So those are the headlines for this program. And now we'll turn it over to both of our lovely panelists here. So let's give me just a second as I set up. So let's talk about Argentina and their IMF deal. I've been following this for months. It's interesting. Our friends over at the CEPR, the good economists over there, Joseph Stiglitz and Mark Weisbrot, say this is a good thing. The people of Argentina have been protesting, so on and so forth. So I'll turn it over to you, ladies.
One of the things that I'm hearing from the people, the most leftist among the Peronistas in Argentina, is that the issue that they are having with the deal with the IMF, besides the crisis, the ongoing crisis, and how this would cripple the ability of the government in making proper investments within their people, is that to make what they are doing with the IMF, they are kind of putting all the wrongdoings, or at least the most terrible wrongdoings of Mauricio Macri, the neoliberal who made those deals, are being cast aside because they are admitting that his request for a loan in the past was legitimate. And this will be very, very bad for their case that they have been building against Macri in Argentina. And we have to remember that Alberto Fernandez's government has a strong opposition within its own government. Also, and not just like Alberto Fernandez, but also there is a ongoing clash in Argentina. We are seeing the rise of the far right in Argentina, which is also very concerning in the face of like people like Javier Milei and others. And this is and the fact that Alberto Fernandez is not delivering the part of the most radical Peronistas were waiting, like a strong rebuild of like the system, might mean that the far right can grow more, even more, because they had midterms election recently, and they had a major presence, something that was unknown. And there is a risk of people from not just from the far right, but people, los macristas, like they say in Argentina, to get back in power as well. So my view of the loan is that to repay the debt is to accept that what Macri did was not illegal, even though it was, and to put the people to attach Argentina to a debt that will make their ability of leaving the bad place they are right now and to seek out a way to improve the most impoverished part of the society there.
So, like Natalia, when she says that it isn't illegal, that whatever Macri did was illegal, well, there are really points that have been raised by a number of people, including from within the Peronista bases and very famous ones like Alicia Castro or Amado Boudou, who was the vice president of Cristina Fernandez, that why is it illegal? And it's not illegal just from Macri's side, it was also illegal from the IMF side. And I was reading whatever they had done. Like the Macri, when he took the loan, it was called a standby agreement. So it's one of those financing schemes that IMF has. So what a standby agreement does, I have pointed out that in case of a standby agreement, it gives the loan with respect to the special drawing rights that a country has within IMF. Now, special drawing rights is like, for example, if you have a savings account in a bank, you have to have some deposit there, right? And you can draw that deposit anytime you want. There are some conditions, of course. So it's in IMF there are much more conditions. But in case of standby agreement, it says that any government which wants a standby can have 145% of its SDR, like more than its SDR, 145% of its SDR rights in a 12-month period. And over a total period of the loan, whatever it might be, the maximum is 3 years for any standby agreement, except in exceptional cases. So it's for 35% of the SDR. Now, I found out that in 2018, the Argentina's SDR in IMF was 3.1873 billion, which was equivalent at that time to $4.46 billion. Now, if you have the standby agreement, and if I consider that they get the maximum, which is like for 35% over a 3-year period, it could have got, the Argentine government under Macri would have got $19.4 billion. However, they got 56.7 billion, which was like 1,100% of its SDR shares in the IMF. So, of course, of that, some 45 billion was disbursed. And then Alberto Fernandez came to power in like December 2019. He took office and he asked IMF not to send the remaining installments. And I quote, like I translate what he said. He said that taking these installments will be equivalent to drinking wine to cure drunkenness. He said it in 2019, but now he is taking another loan to refinance that loan that Macri had taken in order to pay IMF back. So, like, he is taking money from the IMF and paying it back to IMF in dollars with interest. So, this is like these are the points that Alicia Castro and Amadou Bodo and other people had raised, that these are like these are the crossing every limit, even illegality from the IMF side. There was another illegality that during Macri's 4-year term, some $86.2 billion had left the country in one of the largest capital flights in the history of the world, not just Argentina. So IMF knew all the money that IMF gave, this $56.7 billion, whatever loan it had given, all this went away from the country. It was bought as dollar bonds from the Central Bank of Argentina by some of the richest people who are also Macri's friends, and they took it to tax havens. So none of that money reached the economy. Argentine economy fell throughout Macri's time. It did not do anything. And the people who were preparing the reports for IMF, they knew, they wrote it every time that capital flight is happening in Argentina. So IMF has this statute. I know IMF is a terrible organization. It wants to eat up all the natural resources of every country, but it has a statute. And in Article 6, it says that IMF will never finance a capital flight. IMF knew that it was financing capital flight in Argentina, and still it went on disbursing the installments that it had promised. So these were two illegal things that, according to Alicia Castro, the Argentine government could go to the International Court of Justice to demand reparations and not to take the loan, because what Natalia was saying, that Alberto Fernandez has said that this will help them to avoid inflation and stuff like that. That is not really happening. Rolling inflation is 52.3% already. So this is not helping.
So Saheli, what you said there is very important, because so let's back up a little bit. So the current president of Argentina, his name is Alberto Fernandez. Just in case for folks who didn't know, that's his name. The prior administration was headed by someone by the name of Macri. Right now, Macri goes and gets this loan. Fernandez is the incoming president, and now has to deal with this, and basically is saying this. I'm inheriting this problem. We didn't create this problem. I'm inheriting the problem, and this is the only solution. And again, I'm okay on political theory. I'm on stuff on economics. I'm not. And so I myself, I'm glad that you brought that up. This is an important point what you just said, because there is a split. I mean, there's even a group. So we mentioned Joseph Stiglitz and Mark Weisbrot, and folks can go to their website and check the statement that they made. They're supportive of the deal. Then there's a Puebla group, which you have people like Rafael Correa, Lula da Silva, Fernando Lugo. Okay, so if Rafael Correa is a trained economist, and they're all saying same thing, hey, you should take this deal. But Saheli, we can highlight that one more time, because this is important. This is so now the vice president, Cristina Fernandez Kirchner, and her son, who's a congressman, and Natalia, if you could also mention what we talked about off air. He voted no. It's obvious that Cristina Kirchner was just not really too pleased, and this has caused a lot of internal strife within the political party, the Peronista party. So if you could just again highlight this, I think this is really important.
Okay,
so in other words, you're saying that there is an alternative. You don't have to take the deal.
Actually, I was surprised that Rafael Correa supported it, because his government in 2008-9 faced the same crisis. Okay, not this amount, but the crisis that he faced was IMF was demanding back all that loan it had given to Ecuador from 1976 to 2006. So this was a long period, and IMF was demanding that the government paid back. And from 1976 to 2006, it was not Correa who had taken the money. It were the earlier governments, including neoliberal governments in the 90s. In fact, in 1999, Ecuador had declared default, that it could not get any credit from any voluntary credit markets, nor from IMF. So Rafael Correa in 2008-9, his government renegotiated this debt with IMF. He did not refinance it. he renegotiated the debt and got a straight off debt cut by 65%. That is, of all the debt that it owed IMF, 65% was written down because his government could prove that all this amount had been taken illegally by some means or other. So if you are taking debt illegally and not using it for the benefit of the people, but using it contrary to the people, it's called odious debt. So this, they proved that this was odious debt and got this what is called a debt haircut in the economic terms. So the fact that he did not say this or mention this and instead said that this was the best choice that Argentina could make, that this was the lesser evil and stuff like that, that really had surprised me. And also the economist who had advised his government at the time, Alejandro Olmos Ganoa, he is from Argentina. And he like discussed all these things. He is against the Argentine IMF agreement, and he wanted the government to renegotiate and get a debt haircut like Korea had got in 2009. So I'm really surprised by Korea's stand. I cannot say about the other people. And I think Lula in 2002 had said something supportive of IMF, that IMF loans help people and stuff like that, which was not very well received very well by most leftist elements. Natalia can talk about this better, I think. So it was not really received with the greatest enthusiasm by the most left parts of his supporters. But anyway, I mean, Brazil was not facing the same crisis that Argentina is facing right now. So yeah, I was surprised by Puebla Group's stand and particularly by Rafael Correa's stand.
One of the things that is interesting, so just out of curiosity, is when Ecuador was doing like elections campaigns, Andrés Arauz, who was Correa's candidate, the left alternative, he went to meet with IMF to say that they would honor his debts, because a part of those people who were in coalition with him were just like what part of the Peronistas are saying in Argentina, which is like, we don't need to pay them because this is not something that we wanted. The money was not used in the country. It came here in illegal ways. So no. And regarding, but Arauz went there. He tried to show a good side to the capital. Well, it didn't work. So, but anyway, regarding Argentina, what Victor was talking about, like Máximo Kirchner, was that he was the leader of the Congress. He is the son of Cristina Fernandez and the late president Néstor Kirchner. And he was the leader of the governmentist base in the Congress, and he quit his position, saying that he was against the negotiation with IMF, the deal they were trying to cut at the time, because this was in February. And he stated that he would rather to have President Fernandez electing someone that believed in the program of IMF, but not only that is looking beside what's going on after 2023, which would be the time where his term as a congressman would finish. And many people supported him. We have to remember that the Argentinian government is extremely complex, because Fernandez is in the center of Cristina Kirchner, and he and her, they have a lot of clashes, but not directly. It's more coming from her side of Congress people and supporters regarding not just his economic politics, but also regarding of other things that he has been doing Now with you mentioned Alicia Castro, and the things with the COVID were very criticized by the most like radical left in Argentina. They were saying that the government didn't do enough. There's also many social issues that they should be doing, including like the release of political prisoners in Argentina. And Fernandez is someone that, even though he's a part of the new pink tide, if we can say like that, he's someone that he's always showing himself as an extremely moderate candidate. That's for those who follow the issue with Las Malvinas. You would see that people like Alicia Castro are always criticizing the fact that he's not more, I don't know, he's not more confrontation with the United Kingdom regarding like making harsh statements on the sovereignty claims, etc. So he's someone that is always trying to please the capital. He's always trying to please the elites. But we know that the Argentine elites, as much as the other elites in South America, they will always hug, they will always embrace the neoliberals. So I think he's doing a terrible mistake. And the midterms election showed that he is doing a big mistakes. And this is not, it is an ongoing situation. This is not new. This is coming way before he even, when they were still campaigning with people saying, well, I'm voting for Fernandez, but because of Cristina, not La Jefa, not because of him, because he was someone that when Nestor was in power, when Cristina was in power, he was someone from the opposition. So it is extremely complex. And I think this deal will hurt the Argentina government, like the late and always dear Diego Maradona said to Mauricio Macri once, like, you screw 2 generations of Argentinians for life.
Yeah.
To put a final touch on this, Sally, did you want to add anything to that before we?
Well, actually, there is so much stuff there. But anyway, since Natalia mentioned the midterms, yes, I mean, Frente de Todos, which is the ruling coalition. Now, they say that in Argentina, like I've heard Argentines saying that the problem is that it is Frente de Todos, of everyone. So, like, everyone is not leftist, everyone is not progressive within the Frente de Todos. It's like more like Cristina Fernandez's base, that is the left part. And yes, people had voted because Alberto Fernandez during his campaign had said that he would govern together with Cristina. He will listen to what Cristina says. He will like take her advice, etc. But apparently, after coming to power and after the government was formed, they did not have much interaction, and like she could not even talk to him in the Parliament House or anything. She had to go to his residence to talk to him because she could not get hold of him like that. There has been complaints that he is surrounded by people who do not have the best interests of the Argentines at heart. So that's a big problem in Argentina. Like Natalia said, it's complex. Peronism is complex. It has both right-wing elements and left-wing elements. Let's remember that this crisis started exploding from the early 90s when another person with Peronista slogans was president. It was Carlos Menem. Like, he sold everything, he privatized everything, including lakes, including beaches. Like, Argentina was selling land to the oligarchy. So it was at the time, I mean, I wasn't born, but I know I had heard from people later that was a time when Argentines left the country in droves because the system was collapsing. So yes, it's very complex, and I think that there is, and not just I, there are many people who think that in 2023 there is a real chance of Macri or someone like him, his candidate, or even worse than him, coming back to power. So that's a real chance. They say that if the price of meat lost us the Senate, because Frente de Todos lost, Peronism lost the majority in the Senate for the first time that they have been in power. So like since they have lost the majority in Senate because of the price of meat which was going high, at present price of wheat, price of soybean, price of other stuff like foodstuffs especially, it's because of foodstuffs that the rolling inflation reached 52%, crossed 52%. So they're saying that this is going to cost them the government. So someone like Macri, if Macri or someone like him comes back in 2023, then not only will they honor this particular deal that they have at present, but like they will probably go back to recklessly taking money from IMF again, and IMF will not really uh, try to apply its own statute, because when it was giving Macri the loan in 2018, it had given the loan to him as a sort of his campaign contribution. They wanted him to remain in power from 2019 also, and this was admitted. I mean, I read it in all places on Infobae that this was admitted by Mauricio Claver Carone, who was the like at that time he was the US representative on the IMF board, and he said that Trump wanted IMF to give this money to Macri so that his government could avoid economic pitfalls in 2018 and 19 and win the presidency, because he did not want populist axis of Argentina, Venezuela and Cuba forming there, because like when Cristina Fernandez was the president, she had very good relations with this government, like in the first pink tide. So they were afraid, like Trump was afraid, IMF was afraid that if Cristina becomes the president, she will declare this debt illegal and things like that, and will like steer the country more to the left. So they were afraid, they wanted to avoid it. So this was like a bet, this was like campaign contribution. So IMF still lost, and the loser should be a loser and should not get the money from the people of Argentina.
So to put a bow on this, just a couple notes. You mentioned but it's worth noting. There is a 12-month rolling inflation rate of 52.3%. 40% of Argentinians are living in poverty. And then lastly, I just want to read a quote here by a senator from Frente de Todos. This is the quote. Senator Jose Mayans said the following. He said, "They left the economy broke and they went to the IMF. Who made this credit? The IMF or the President of the United States? The skill that Macri had is that all the time he was bad-mouthing Venezuela. This was a political credit. First, they gave him 50,000 palos verdes, or $1 million, and then they added 7,000 more," end quote. So that speaks to some of what you just said there, Saheli. So again, we'll keep monitoring this here at ANTICONQUISTA and Orinoco Tribune. Let's go ahead and move on to the next topic. So,
just one thing is I have a dear friend in Argentina, and regarding like the prices of meat, he told me if Argentina started to lacking meat, like if people, a great number of people wouldn't be able to afford meat, that revolution would appears like a child play in comparison of what Argentinians would do. Like, don't mess with their asados. So the crisis, the economic crisis, is something that there has been used by Bolsonaro in Brazil, the crisis in Argentina, to push for the ascension of the far right, not just locally, but also internationally, because Eduardo Bolsonaro, who is someone that I like to say is the geopolitical son of Jair Bolsonaro, he's always having Javier Milei, he's always bashing Alberto Fernandes' government. He's always saying that Argentina will be the new Venezuela. And this was something that Bolsonaro himself has stated when he met with the CIA director last year, that Argentina was the most worrying country in Latin America, in South America in specific right now, because they had a very dangerous government. And we have to remember that one of the bids that had been in conversations, or at least, I don't know if they went to negotiations at this point is to Argentina also join BRICS. And we know how Europe, the European Union in specific, and the United States feel about BRICS. Like, they don't like BRICS at all. So to cripple a big economy like Argentina would be great for them. I don't know if you agree with me, Sally, but to me it feels like they are trying to, I don't know, make Argentina dependable of foreigner money, at least for more than a decade, so they can work out a plan to destroy BRICS or whatever.
Yeah, that's sure. Like, economy is the main thing behind geopolitics, right? So BRICS is trying to break free of the IMF and create an alternative system. And you have, like, that some of the largest economies in the world, including China, including India, Brazil, in the BRICS, and of course Russia. Now you can also see that all this economic assault against Russia coming up at present. I mean, it's like a war on two fronts if we look at it. Like, Russia is being assaulted economically in all possible ways, and Argentina is being uh, made to go into, like, to drown in debt for so long. Like, I mean, they say that it could be for 100 years, like they would be in debt for 100 years because of this. So in this way, yes, they are going to trying to cripple all the economies that are there in within the BRICS. Like, they know they cannot cripple China like that, but they can definitely cripple Argentina if it joined BRICS, because it is already, like, has signed new deals, economic deals, with both China and Russia. They were like billion-dollar deals in all different types of places, in trade, in what to say, like mainly trade and commerce, technology, etc. So I think it's like a way to make Argentina so crippled that even if it joined BRICS, even if it has joined Belt and Road, it did. So even if it does this, it will be dependent on the West and cannot really break free of that domination.
So let's actually stay with let's skip around a little bit. Let's stay with Brazil. You mentioned Brazil there. You alluded to Brazil. So we want to dedicate a segment here to Brazil. So this is an election year. Right now, unemployment has lowered in Brazil to 11.2%. Natalia, I want to go to you because there's some money now being pumped into the economy. I'm very familiar with these type of tactics. In the Dominican Republic, you see it all the time, and that's just this is just sort of like at the surface level. Behind the scenes, there's also a bunch of stuff that happens with politics and money and people in the street receiving money from political parties. But can you talk about the election? The upcoming election. You see polls. You see a slight uptick in Jair Bolsonaro's polling numbers. Jair Bolsonaro is the incumbent. He's the current president of Brazil. Lula da Silva, former president of Brazil, is running up against him, and all indications are that Lula will win this year. But let's jump over to Brazil now.
Well, the thing is, even with money being pumped into the population, people are not being able to get the bare minimum. We have over 50% of Brazilians live in food insecurity right now. We are seeing a rise on the prices of gas, a rise on the prices of fuel, that of course will have a direct impact on the prices of everything, including food. So what people in Brazil, and this is something that has been an ongoing discussion, and it doesn't have anything to do with the Ukrainian war, because the prices were rising before, and even so, we have fuels that are used in Brazil like the ethanol that is made from sugarcane, which means that it doesn't come from petrol, have a huge rise on the prices as well. So this has anything to do with the war. It has with the economical, political decisions that Bolsonaro and his government have been taking within its economy. We are seeing people in Brazil right now desperate regarding not just job employment, because even for a while we had people surfing on the gig economy with apps and trying to support themselves, being Uber drivers or anyway, like working on apps. And nowadays many people are giving up to work on apps because they basically cannot afford gas anymore. They cannot afford to own a car anymore. So it's and also we are seeing that Bolsonaro is not doing enough to give people to give an incentive for those prices to lower down, because I mean Brazil has its own oil company, a national oil company, which Petrobras, which he has been, and not just him, but it started after the coup. It has been crippled. It has been some of their stations, not gas stations, sorry, the refineries have been privatized without consent of the general population, without the consent of the oil workers union, and the price is going up, and the price is going up. So what we are seeing now, even though Bolsonaro is polling a bit better, and I'm saying like really a bit, is that even so he is polling a bit better, we have Lula winning in all scenarios, including a scenario against Bolsonaro. Because many of the voting that Bolsonaro would receive, a part of those voters will migrate to the former disgraced judge Sérgio Moro, who was the responsible for the car wash operation, who was the responsible for the imprisonment of President Lula under false pretenses, and now he's running to be a president as well. And part of the people that would vote for Bolsonaro will definitely vote for him, and vice versa. And Lula is going on an opposite direction when we have like parties that could have their own candidates, parties that are like center-left parties, that they are choosing to go with Lula as their option to avoid a second round of vote of the election, or even like to support a broader coalition of progressive parties in Brazil to defeat Bolsonaro. This is very problematic, but also the way things are going in Brazil is also the only alternative, because we have to be very pragmatic about the situation. And I know that some parties, like the Brazilian Communist Party, they will have their own candidate, which is a great person. Her name is Sofia Marzano. She's a great professional. But their electoral polling is minimum. So instead of like parties like PSOL, which stands for socialism and liberty, they chose to go with Lula because we are seeing a scenario that we cannot risk having Bolsonaro winning again. And the way things are going, especially now with Ukraine, especially with the United States and Europe trying to cripple down even more BRICS, trying to destroy any type of attempt of a multipolar world, they cannot afford to have a government that would be opening for the multipolar world. And we have like Lula always saying that he wants that multipolarity is vital. We have like people like Dilma from PT, like big senior members of PT going for multipolarity. And we have the alternatives. The alternative would be Bolsonaro, and Bolsonaro is terrible. And we know that the empire doesn't like Bolsonaro either, but he's someone that they can manage. So at this point, I think foreign policy will not interfere as much as usual at the opinions of people. It's more about like people trying to remember, and this is something that PT has been doing so well on their campaign, that is to remember, when you have Lula as your president, you could afford gas, you could afford food, you could have a job, you could have a house, and now you cannot have any of those things anymore.
Yeah, like that's a good breakdown of the entire situation, because yeah, Brazil is also a complex place, though it seems like Lula is going, like, if he has the necessary support, he might be winning in the first round, which would be the best case scenario actually, because otherwise it happens all the time. Like we have seen in case of Ecuador, the most recent case, that in the second round, Arauz, although he was leading in the first round by more than 10 points over his nearest rival, which was Lasso, lost in the second round. Because what happens all the time is that if a very right wing candidate, whatever sort of right wing candidate, goes into the second round, that all the factions of the right as well as the center right, parts of the center, go on supporting him. So I mean, whoever, like not him or her, whichever is the candidate. So that happened in case of Ecuador, and I don't know if it's going to happen in case of Brazil, but I can guess that it's happened, since it happens in all countries. It Brazil should not be an exception. So it really would be the best for Lula to win in the first round. Like he is a best hope, and let's say that he is to the left of Alberto Fernandez on many policy positions. So him winning in Brazil would strengthen the new pink tide much more than Alberto Fernandez becoming president in Argentina has. Like it has like dampened the hopes a bit. But in case of Brazil, yes, Lula had been a great leader in, like when he was the president two times. So it will be a new phase of reintegration of the, I mean, regional integration of Latin America if Lula wins. Like he was one of the driving forces of that integration in the earlier period. He could be doing the same. I mean, Latin America needs to be a region independent of the North. So in this phase, I think like Lula, with his, if he returns, he will strengthen BRICS, he will strengthen other mechanisms. So it will be good not just for Brazil, but for the entire Latin American and Caribbean region as well.
All right, so I think we'll end our segment there on Brazil. I just want to add a few other things of note. So the Brazilian economy is being impacted by the Russia-Ukrainian crisis. Export of beef, chicken, soy, corn are expected to increase. However, there's an issue with the importation of fertilizer. Russia is a top supplier of fertilizer to Brazil. President Bolsonaro is using this as an opportunity to say, this is our opportunity to go after, mining in indigenous land, right? And the comeback to that is that, well, there's not much potassium that you're going to find in these lands, and that's what's needed for the main ingredient for the fertilizer. Just some other notes here.
If I can say something, like it's not like he's just taking advantage of the crisis, because he knows, it does not just he, but I mean everybody knows that first of all there has not been that much hope of getting potassium in the Amazon forest region. Like there are other things, there is gas, there is natural gas and oil, but not potassium and stuff like that. And not just him, Bolsonaro is just one person. The elites of Brazil have always had their eye on that land. And like only earlier last year, or maybe late 2020, the government of Brazil, like Bolsonaro's government, had declared, it was ominous, that the land in the Amazonian region, he called it an agricultural land, that it's because people produce there. It's true. So he called it an agricultural land, whereas it is not. It should be a protected area like it was and is still. I mean, he hasn't abrogated those articles of constitution or anything. So it's not like he is after potassium or he is after anything. It's just an excuse to grab more indigenous land than they're already grabbing through all those forest fires and stuff.
And the issue regarding what he wants actually with indigenous land is that on the bill that he's passed through the Congress in a character of emergency, said that people would have the right to explore the lands for mining, but also for sources of energy, hydrocarbonates, and also for water. So they are actually going through all the natural resources. And of course, this is something that Bolsonaro has never, it was always his intention. This is not just for him. Like, we have to remember that during the Brazilian military dictatorship in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, especially in the 70s, the military in Brazil, they made a huge damage in the Amazon, and they made like open propaganda saying that the Amazonian region would be a great place for developing industries, and also that the forest was not profitable. So we have to destroy the forest to have like profitable land. So this is something that the military have been wanting for a while. And this is something that many people is including like in Brazil. They don't account for all the populations, all the indigenous populations that have been victims of genocide in the hands of the military because they wanted their land. So Bolsonaro is trying to do the same. And when he was confronted about like wanting to mine on indigenous land, he said, well, mining will happen a way or another. It would be much nicer if we had like this making a mining process legally instead of like making illegally. But no, what he should be doing, what the authorities in Brazil should be doing is like punishing and watching for all the mining activities that are happening illegally within indigenous lands, because those activities, they're not just like prejudicial in the great scheme of things, like, oh, they're like destroying the environment and poisoning the indigenous. No, those people also kill indigenous, they rape women, they kidnap children. So it is a full-blown like colonial violence that happens when miners invade indigenous lands. And Bolsonaro has been always choosing to look the other way, to ignore what has been happening there. So this is very serious.
So just one last note on Brazil, on that thought. I said I put this in my notes tongue in cheek. Bolsonaro, the environmental leader, the advocate of indigenous peoples. Of course, I'm kidding, but there were some headlines here where this was again, it's laughable, even though it's a serious matter. Brazilian Justice Minister, right, Anderson Torres, gave his boss, President Jair Bolsonaro, the Medal of Indigenous Merit, an award for recognition for relevant services in the defense of indigenous communities, which drew a huge outrage in Brazil. But again, it's an election year. This is not uncommon, seeing this type of stuff, these type of shenanigans in Latin America. The time now is 7:55. Ladies, do you have time for one more or no?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back to Peru. So what's happening in Peru? So in Peru, we have President Pedro Castillo, who has been in power now for less than a year, and he's had 4 different cabinets. And just recently, Congress, Peru's Congress, voted to debate an impeachment request. So 76 voted in favor, 41 against, 1 abstention. And just overall, just for folks taking notes at home, 87 votes are needed for actual removal of power. It's a one-house parliament, and they're going to start the debate on his impeachment on March 28th. So, ladies, take it from there.
Actually, this is the second motion of impeachment that the parliament is going to debate against him on 28th March. The first motion was passed on 10th November. So he was he became the president in very late July. And by 10th November, there was already a motion of impeachment against him in parliament. So that did not pass. And I hope this does not pass either, because that would create chaos in Peru. I mean, saying chaos in Peru is it's normal chaos in Peru, because you remember in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis in mid 2020, in October, I think, Peru had 4 presidents within 10 days, almost breaking the record of Argentina in 2001. So that's something that's common in Peru, and there is a reason why it's so common, because the constitution of Peru is the present constitution, that is, which was made at the time of the dictator Alberto Fujimori. It was made like this in order for the Congress to impeach the president, remove the president very easily on something called moral incapacity. There is no definition of moral incapacity there. Anything can be moral incapacity. So it's very vague. It is kept vague on purpose. Similarly, it's also easy for the president, or it was easy for the president, to dissolve the Congress. And let's remember that this happened also in the earlier terms, just before the Pedro Castillo, the person who was elected, the last time the Peru elected a president was Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, some 5 years ago, and he had been removed from his position, from the presidency, with this moral incapacity thing. And then the person who came after him, who succeeded him, was his vice president, Martin Vizcarra, and he dissolved the Congress. He dissolved the Congress and elected, called for early elections, got a new Congress that was more aligned to him. This Congress ended up impeaching him and removing him from power. So it's like a constant tug of war between two elite groups. I mean, I'm not calling Pedro Castillo elite. In 200 years, it is the first time that someone not from the elite is president, in its entire history of the independent country. So in earlier times, it was just a tug of war between different groups of elites, somebody removing the president dissolving the Congress again removing the president, and this went on. This has been going on for a long time, especially with this constitution. So this is not there is a background to this, and a background not a very hopeful background, because it's quite easy to impeach a president. I hope this does not pass, it did not pass in November, but I don't know. What would you say, Natalia?
Well, he was never wanted there, but again, the alternative was Keiko Fujimori, who is someone that not even the broader capital was able to sell out as a actual valid alternative, because she couldn't even leave Peru for making the traditional neoliberal trips to Europe and to United States to sell out their government plans, because she's someone that is also being accused of corruption, so she cannot leave the country. And Pedro Castillo, he hasn't been allowed to govern. We have to remember that he's going through his 4th cabinet right now, and he has been elected less than a year. So this is something that people don't take in consideration when criticizing him. And one of the things that is very interesting is that one of the accusations, they are doing many accusations against him. Of course, corruption is something that the media will sell out more, because when we are talking about impeached presidents in Latin America, and then we have to remember how lawfare works, it's always around corruption charges. but is because he's accused of betraying the nation because of an interview he gave in the past, saying that he would be willing to talk with Bolivia about giving them an exit to the sea. But this was just an interview. He was not president yet. And even so, it was just talk. He was not actually saying that he would do those things, which is something ironically that Bolivia is trying to do with Chile right now. That is to talk about like an actual exit for sea. But anyway, I think what Castillo has been showing that he's desperate. He even met with Bolsonaro recently. Bolsonaro, who was someone that refused to go to his inauguration, and now he was like kind of like complimenting Pedro Castillo. They made a ridiculous photo op together with Bolsonaro wearing his traditional rondero hat, which was like really, really strange. But Castillo is someone that he's putting himself in a very complicated position because he's trying to please everybody, but he's not pleasing the people who elected him. He's not pleasing his own party because he's always trying to make concessions to the capital, to the bourgeoisie, who are people who will never support him. So basically, it's hard to know at the moment, but I hope not, because Peru, like you were saying, Saheli, is a place that it hasn't had a president being able to terminate his term for quite some time. So it would be good to see what he could do in 4 years, and or even like more years if he is reelected or not. But let's wait and see. There has been a lot of noise internationally, especially from the leftist parties in Latin America, to support him, to denounce this as a coup attempt. But because of the other things happening in the media, this is not being given much attention. But yeah, you had people from Bolivia is being extremely vocal about it, because of course they are not just like neighboring countries, but they also share the same indigenous ethnicities. Other movements in Venezuela, we had Foro de São Paulo, we have Alba TCP. They are all going towards Peru to say that they are hope to see justice been made, which means to let Castillo to continue as Peru's president.
Yeah, and that's actually that charge. Like, since you mentioned that about betraying the nation, that charge is really ridiculous because, first of all, like the fact that Bolivia already does have very limited access to the sea through Peru, and it was done by Fujimori in 1992. I think he made a presidential decree giving Bolivia a beach for purposes of tourism. It's called Mar Bolivia. People can look it up. So he gave like it for tourism purposes, not for trade. And this decree was broadened a bit more with limited cargo and stuff like that by Alan Garcia during his second term. So it isn't like Pedro Castillo is the first person to say this or something. And also, what Castillo did was that he said that he would call for a referendum on this. Like, he would ask the people whether Bolivia should be given access to the sea through Peru. He never said that he would do a decree like the earlier presidents who did give access to Bolivia did. They did it with decrees. He said that he would do it with a referendum. Like, if people want it, he will do it. And also he said that the territorial integrity of Peru will never be violated under him, which means that he would not be selling land to Bolivia, right? He would not do anything. Like, so, and of course, this was discussed between Castillo and Luis Arce, who is the president of Bolivia. At the time, Castillo visited Bolivia, and they also have something called a binational cabinet discussing bilateral issues. So there is a permanent cabinet between the two countries to discuss this issue also, among other things. And if we are talking about access to the sea, it should really be Chile giving access to Bolivia, because it was Chile that stole the entirety of Antofagasta from Bolivia in the 19th century. So it also stole land from Peru. So actually, Bolivia had a case against Chile at the International Criminal Court about this, that they wanted to not just access, they had many other stuff. Bolivia lost, but still, it would be a better way not to fight among neighboring countries, but to do it in a diplomatic manner. So if Chile and Peru both give access to the sea to Bolivia, like for trade purposes, it will immensely help Bolivia not to pay all those taxes and stuff in order to have access to the sea. So that's something like, oh, it looks like I am supporting Bolivia in its claim for the sea. But yeah, that claim has been there. It's not like my support or something, it has been there for more than a century. So that's something to talk about, discuss, like that's something to think of. There is precedent and there is this long history behind this. So it's not like Castillo one day all of a sudden just says, okay, I am going to give Bolivia access to the sea. He said nothing like that. So that's a terrible thing. And like the chaos that Peru is going through is not just the chaos of impeachment problems and such. Like its judiciary, like I think Victor has talked about this, that its judiciary is quite opposed to the government because it is an inheritance from the earlier elites. So there are still elites in the judiciary. So it is opposed to the government and it is trying everything, like every branch of judiciary is trying everything to get this government out. So that's something I wanted to mention. Like I might talk about this a bit more if Victor says, but anyway.
No, yeah, go right ahead. I mean, I think you're just alluding to the fact that again, so in Peru, this is the first time in its history that they've ever had anything like this guy, right, be in power. I mean, they've never had somebody with this type of progressive, inclination, tendency, and it's basically been like similar to like Colombia, a couple hundred years of a certain group of people dominating the politics of the country, and those people now they view somebody like Castillo and his political party as a threat, and they're not just going to give up their stuff. They're not going to give up their stuff. They're not going to give up their power willingly. So, but go ahead and continue to.
Yeah,
to
it's like it's first of all, yeah, they consider him as a threat, and they also like look down upon him, like hold him in contempt, from a very racist point of view, also because like he is not the white people among the white people, right? So he comes from a rural area and from an indigenous population. So it's something that having an indigenous person in the presidential palace is something that Peru has never seen, like even its long history of independence. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And the other thing that I really wanted to mention is something Victor mentioned to us, that Castillo said something about an institutional crisis, Peru living a crisis of institution in it. And that is where I wanted to mention the judiciary. Like it's not just the legislative or the executive, it's not just him having this fourth cabinet or something like that. Even the judiciary is in a crisis. Like I was looking at the Constitutional Court that recently gave a sort of pardon to Fujimori, like let him go home. So the court that ordered it is the Constitutional Tribunal of Peru. The Constitutional Tribunal is supposed to have 7 members. It has, but the thing is, out of the 7, 5 members' terms have already expired, and the another one, like a sixth, his term will also expire very soon. So it is the only country in the continent, in the South American continent, that has this sort of situation regarding its constitutional tribunal, which is like the highest court of the land. So the highest court of the land has 5 of its members' terms ended. So why should their decision be valid? Like regarding Fujimori or regarding anything, why should their decision be valid? And then there was also something I was looking at, that the public prosecutor's office, that they were supposed to have 5 members, they have only 2. So like what is the public prosecutor's office doing? That's an office that also discusses law and legality in the country. So like this is the sort of crisis that Peru lives, and it is not like the Congress isn't there, that it is not like it cannot elect people to these positions, because all these positions have to be elected through the Congress. It isn't like that. The Congress, the only thing that it is doing is that it's trying to get Castillo out of power. It isn't doing anything that it is supposed to do. Like, instead of doing anything that it is supposed to do, instead of like helping the government, because in any country, the Congress and the executive branch, that is the presidency, should be working together in order to solve the problems, because one cannot do it on their own. Like, one power cannot do it on its own. So instead of doing these things, the only thing that the Congress has dedicated itself to has been try to get Castillo out of power by any means. So yes, we are looking at a coup attempt, and this is also giving me like the Brazil vibes, which I call, like when Dilma was removed from power. So that's something that I am remembering, and I think Natalia would support me.
Just to finish, something that is very interesting is that the Congress of Peru has, and the elites, of course, they were never very happy with the closeness of Peru Libre, which is the party of Pedro Castillo, nor Pedro Castillo proximity of Evo Morales and the movement towards socialism, the MAS in Bolivia. And a few months ago, the Commission for Foreign Affairs of the Congress tried to declare Evo Morales as a persona non grata, saying that he was interfering too much in the politics of the country. And this is something that is very interesting for us here, I think, that ANTICONQUISTA and those who are watching, that we are always talking about the integration of Latin America. It's how we can, a fine example of how we can see the elites getting desperate, seeing how like the radical, the popular, and the leftist are getting united in Latin America, and they don't want to see this type of movement. So the fact that now they are also again using Bolivia to trying to impeach and attack the government of Pedro Castillo and try to force his impeachment is really ridiculous. And also it's regarding the news that is on the screen of the President Fujimori, we have to remember that President Fujimori was a dictator, and he was also someone that committed hundreds of thousands crimes against humanity when he promoted the forced sterilization of hundreds of thousands of indigenous, peasant, and poor people in Peru, but mainly indigenous. And many of those people were never able to get justice, because even when they tried to go to courts, they were not Spanish speakers, and the courts would not give them translators because they spoke Aymara or Quechua, and they were never given the opportunity to tell their story to and give their testimony to the judicial system. So, and I think that it's absurd, and it shows a lot about how rotten the system of Peru is. Like, you're having the first time an indigenous president who is a trade union teacher coming to power and facing all this opposition, all the system against him, and you have a literal criminal, assassin, someone that committed crimes against humanity, being freed from prison for humanitarian reasons because he's old and frail right now.
It's important to know, and so again, I emphasize certain things that we know that are obvious, just in case if people at home, watching, don't know. So his daughter was the person who ran for the presidential office last year. She lost, refused to acknowledge that she lost, and started saying that the elections were stolen from her. And she's a principal leader of this, this very reactionary political force that Sahili, I think you're right on point. It's important to continue to monitor the situation because it's clear, it's obvious they've never wanted this guy. The right, the bourgeoisie, the political actors in power never wanted this guy to win in the first place. All right, so he wins, and now they're doing everything possible to make Peru ungovernable, and they continue to go after him. So I've made the argument that he needs to start fighting back and let the chips fall where they may, and let history dictate where that movement goes, because there's only so much you can take. This is now, again, this is he's under his fourth cabinet now, right? And again, now where there's another impeachment, debate process hearing, which we all know is BS. So anything else before? So we're now at, I always have to do the time check. So we're at 1 hour and 15 minutes. I think we're going to leave it there. We wanted to talk about Chile, so I think we're probably going to have to open up with Chile next week. Anything else before we end today's program?
Actually, I'm thinking, just like you mentioned, that Castillo needs to fight back. I think that the speech that he made in Congress was a sort of fight back, like the first that we are seeing, because like earlier when he was told to remove his very progressive foreign minister Hector Bejar, the first person that he had chosen as the foreign minister, he did it. Then he dissolved the entire cabinet with like everyone in it and started a new one, then a new one in this year earlier, and then this is the fourth. So for all this time he was conceding, and not just through changing of cabinets, but also moving steadily towards the right. The government had started as a center left government, and it is now very dangerously close to center right. I might be making an understatement even when I'm calling it is dangerously close to center right. So the speech that he made like last week, I think in Thursday or Friday. So the speech that he made in Congress, where he called upon those sectors, like even those who are opposing him, including Fujimori's party, like Keiko Fujimori's party and everyone, to work with him. And then he talked about the achievements. He listed the achievements that his government has had. So including, it had a very terrible time through the pandemic. Peru is the country with the highest per capita death in the world from the pandemic. So he took the office in a very problematic situation, and he has had some achievements in these regards also. So he listed all these achievements, and he said that he wanted to do a lot more. That is one thing, and asked everyone to be with him. That is one. And secondly, which did not, something that did not get mentioned, is that today, no, not today, like later, I think on Saturday, he has called upon the local governments, that is the rural bodies and the municipalities, the heads of those places, for a dialogue table starting from next Saturday. So he might be trying to do something through these local governments, bypassing the Congress in certain cases that he can. He cannot pass laws without bypassing the Congress, but he can do many things on the economic front through the local governments. Peru has the power to be like Argentina, to be a country that can export like meat and milk products and stuff like that. So it is like an agricultural power, and it could be and agricultural power. So he could do these things, and I think that this is a sort of fight back that we are watching. Like this may be the beginning of a fight back, and he should do it. Like he had talked about, like when he was doing his presidential campaign, he had also talked about calling a referendum for a constitutional reform, for a new constitution, like Chile has done. So he had called for that same thing. Now the Congress severely limited this process just a few days ago, saying that even if a popular referendum calls for a new constitution, it has to pass through the Congress again. So that is, in my opinion, that is a very direct threat to popular participation in elections, and only the people can undo these sort of things. So Castillo would have to go back to his bases. It has to go back. He has to go back to the people who made it possible for him to become the president, in order to like solve this crisis. Like, it's in his hands, and he has to do whatever it takes.
Also, it's important to mention how great he dealt with the Repsol situation that there was when there was a huge oil spillage in Peruvian Sea. And Repsol, it's a Spanish multinational who the Peruvian government is holding accountable for the disaster, which is something that is extremely uncommon in Latin America. We see those multinational companies commit crimes against the environment and go unpunished by it. But Castillo made sure that they were like prosecuting, and they are publicly pointing out that it was Repsol to be blamed for what has happened. So I think this is something that already shows that even though he's seen a bit misguided, he's very different from the other presidents that Peru had in the past 10 years.
Okay, and I think I saw a comment that isn't the freeing Fujimori a concession to the right. That is the comment I saw. So first of all, it's not the government that is freeing Fujimori, it's the Constitutional Tribunal. And Castillo had made this point again and again, that he is not going to interfere with the other powers of the state, that he will continue to strike a balance, like keep the balance of power as it should be, like as it is in the constitution, and not do anything that goes against it. So it's the Constitutional Tribunal that's freeing it. And I already mentioned, it does not have legitimacy. Like, 5 of the members of the Constitutional Tribunal have their terms finished, so it isn't very legitimate. And Castillo has mentioned, as well as the government, that they will try to go through legal ways to prevent this thing. So like, he is not trying to give a concession to the right at present.
All right. So I think we're gonna end it there. I'll add one thing here, that this just shows you that people, you like to use a lot of cute words like democracy and freedom, and democracy is just not compatible with capitalism. I mean, it's obvious. He won an election, so that means that he won the election. He comes from a Marxist-Leninist party, while he himself maybe not a Marxist-Leninist. I'm not sure what your folks' take is on that. That would be mine, but he's nonetheless a very progressive individual, and his party won. So now they have a mandate to govern. And instead of, if we're living in this ideal world of democracy, whatever that means, then you would say that, okay, the right reactionary forces in Peru would say, okay, let's sit down and rationally deal with these people who won, who we don't agree with, and so we can govern the country. Instead, what has happened? It's been a complete chaos. Again, we're calling it a coup watch over here, ANTICONQUISTA, because as Saheli referred to it before. I like that. She's getting the vibes of what happened with Dilma. So it's obvious that, again, democracy is not compatible with capitalism whatsoever. And in fact, you're seeing that immediately in these places like Peru, and Chile, and even Colombia, where they have to say certain things, and I don't blame them for that when they're campaigning, because they don't want the markets to react a certain way, right? So they have to they campaign one way, and then all of a sudden there's a market reaction. The next thing you know, a week later, 2 weeks later, one of their advisors is saying, "Hey, by the way, don't kind of change that a little bit so we can get a different market reaction," right? So I've been saying forever that this political game, this electoral process, and it is a game, it's a serious game, but this game that Latin Americans are playing. Look, there's only 2 ways to power. That's through picking up arms, or through this chess game, this labyrinth, if you will, of the electoral process. And you have to be a master chess player to be able to maneuver and navigate this stuff. And there are a lot of, I'm going to just say it, there are a lot of white communists in the West who, you know, are armchair revolutionaries and say, well, they're not really revolutionary, they're not really progressive enough for me, they're not really, but you're not living the reality out there. And so Natalia, you mentioned at one time when Lula was in power, say whatever you may want to say about Lula, material conditions got better in Brazil. That's without a doubt. In Ecuador, same thing under Rafael Correa. When Chavez first came into power, same thing. And so, you know, this idea that you know, we can't support these groups because they're not revolutionary enough, they're not socialist enough, so on and so forth. It's a ridiculous argument that people make. But anyways, I'm now editorializing, and I said I wouldn't. So it's an hour and 24 minutes. Until next week, we will be here again next Monday, 7 p.m. Again, this is Victor Coronado alongside Natalia Urban and Saheli. This is Nuestra America episode 19, and this program is brought to you by both ANTICONQUISTA and Orinoco Tribune. So folks, have a great night, and we will see you next week.
Yeah. Bye.